It's back to school time. Here are some truly creepy school stories to keep you awake. Welcome, fellow chill seekers, to Lady Grimm, where the veil between our world and the unknown grows thin. Welcome to Lady Grimm, where the paranormal comes alive. Called by the Devil. The high school I attended was a small, private, all-girls Catholic school in a busy East Coast city. It was old and had a ton of history within its tall, brick-walled property. Before it was a high school, the grounds were near a large river where native people traveled and traded regularly. Later, the site became a convent, and those nuns created a school for girls. First as a boarding school, then later only a day school. The majority of my teachers were nuns, and I was there only a decade ago. As first-year freshmen, we were flooded with the school's haunted history by upperclassmen just wanting to creep out the younger students. There were reports of ghosts all over campus, from the large main historic building to the woods around the upper fields over the hill where our teams practiced. There was a short wooded path between the upper fields and the lower buildings, which also branched off towards a small chapel. The chapel's small convent graveyard was a favorite sneak-off spot for students looking to smoke, or scare themselves with ghost stories, or whatever they thought they'd be brave enough to find. But there was one story that stood out. In the 1950s, there were 3 boarding students that went missing, although at the time they were believed to have been runaways. But when a nun went missing, a young woman who had graduated from the school and then entered the convent, suspicions emerged. She'd been a smart student, often seen studying in the freshman locker room after school. The young nun's body was later found in the woods on campus, near the chapel, her head covered in a black cloth sack. A local man had been charged with her death and openly admitted to taking the lives of the 3 boarding students, but never revealed what had become of their bodies. They buried that young nun in the chapel graveyard, less than 100 feet where her body had been found. The man said he had been called to the campus by the devil. By late September of my freshman year, I hadn't seen anything to make me think the school was haunted. Not until this happened. The freshman lockers were in the basement of the main building, a massive rectangular room lined with rows of lockers on one side, and tables and chairs against the other. This is where we spent our downtime as freshmen between classes. On the far ends of this long room were the light switches that controlled all the overhead lights, and the older students warned us to keep the lights on after dark no matter what, and to never be in the basement alone at night. This was easier said than done, since all our after-school sports or clubs wrapped up well after dark here in New England. I played field hockey as a freshman, and after practice we'd stop back into the basement to grab our stuff from the locker room before leaving. I stayed late to practice my forehand shots at the net, and when my arms felt like noodles, I headed back to the main building for the rest of my stuff. It was full dark, and the short path through the woods gave me the creeps. I pulled out my earpods and felt worse, listening to the wind through the trees. I half jogged to the main building and flipped on the lights at the bottom of the basement stairs. Flip them on, meaning I would be alone down there. My locker was about 20 feet from the bottom of the stairs, past 2 rows of lockers. As I grabbed my bag and closed my locker door, I felt myself rushing. I didn't know if it was going through the woods that night or all the stories I'd heard, but I really felt like I needed to get out of there. As I turned to walk to the end of my row of lockers, I heard something at the opposite end of the row. I turned to look behind me, expecting to see another student, but I didn't see anyone. I turned back, hoisting my heavy backpack over my shoulder, and the lights went out. Assuming someone had left and turned the lights off on their way out, I yelled, "Hey, I'm down here!" No sounds, just darkness. I felt my way to the end of the row of lockers and turned towards the stairs and towards the light switches. In the total darkness, my knee crashed into something metal that scraped along the floor with the force of my forward movement. My foot caught it, forcing it to crash sideways as I fell face first on the hard ground, biting my lip. I could taste the blood before I knew what had happened. I struggled to my feet, desperately, feeling for my backpack that had launched over my head. I reached the light switch and turned it on, looking behind me towards where I had tripped. I saw my collapsed backpack, and beyond it, a single chair. The chair, which should have been on its side, was now upright, facing away from me, and there was a small nun sitting in it. Her back was to me, and she was facing forwards away from me. As my eyes adjusted and I picked up my backpack on the ground, I opened my mouth to say something when I realized she wasn't wearing the normal nun's black veil. She was wearing a black cloth sack over her head. I turned and ran up the stairs, feeling my skin crawl and my heart beating out of my chest. When I turned the corner of the stairs, the light was off again. I never told anyone what I had seen, but I was never alone in that basement again. Not alone. After that incident, I was more careful about being alone, but sometimes it was impossible, or you'd just forget until something happened again to remind you, like this incident when I was a sophomore. The school's main building had a 4-story wooden staircase that was at least 15 feet wide. It was impressive, made of dark polished wood, and creaked and groaned with each step. It was easy to let your mind think about how creepy the building was, especially considering its violent past. One of my favorite teachers was both the English and the drama teacher, and our school put on 2 plays every year. Although I never wanted to be in a play myself, I knew she needed ushers on performance nights to help hand out playbills to the audience and to make sure people could navigate their way out of the 2nd floor theater auditorium to the bathrooms or down to the main floor exit. On the last night of the fall performance, we ran out of playbills about 30 minutes before the show. I knew there was an extra box of playbills on the 4th floor in my English teacher's classroom. I ran up the wide stairs and saw the box just inside her classroom door. Using the hallway light, I grabbed the box off her desk, but before I could turn around, the light faded and the heavy wooden door closed behind me. I turned fast, and using the dim evening light coming from the big window in the classroom, I saw something move near the door. I can only describe it as an inky shadow pressed against the back of the door. Time stopped as I held my breath in the silence, watching the dark mist glide away from the door towards the darkest corner of the room. I felt like it wanted to be seen, but not entirely. It stayed in the shadows away from the window light and then slowly seemed to melt into the wall. There was the eeriest feeling in the room, even worse than when it had been there. It was a feeling of nothingness, aloneness, and despair. My feet were stuck in place. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. Still holding the box of playbills, I heard the click of the door as it suddenly opened just a crack. It looked as though it had been lightly pushed open by a breeze, and the light from the hallway streamed in. I was able to move then and quickly stepped through the darkness into the light. That awful alone feeling lifted as I ran down half the flight of stairs and suddenly felt compelled to look back towards the 4th floor landing. Peering over the banister were 3 girls wearing our school uniform, their young faces expressionless and pale. As I watched, they turned and faded from view. I made sure I wasn't alone in that building again. Thanks for being here with me and listening to these stories. If you're enjoying them, please subscribe, leave a comment, and let me know you're out there. I appreciate it. Now you know. I've always been able to see the dead. Ever since I was a little kid, I could see spirits, usually only in actively haunted places, but occasionally attached to people. They rarely scared me, as most spirits weren't even aware that I could see them. It's when they know you can see them that they get clingy. But my newest batch of 2nd graders has an unwelcome guest. One of my kids, Aaron, has an attachment. As he walked through my classroom's door for the first time, I felt it before I saw it. It felt like hate, and locked eyes with me as it slithered into the classroom behind Aaron. When I realized what it was, I threw my gaze long, hoping it hadn't noticed that I could see it. I don't know how long I'll be able to fool it. I focused hard on Aaron and watched it grow behind him out of the corner of my eye. It clung to the wall behind him. Throughout the day, it faded and grew and occasionally churned enough energy to push Aaron's book off his desk or slam the classroom door, which was near his desk. I had to explain these things away to the kids, feeling horrible about lying to them. As the days wore on, ignoring it became harder. As it hovered near Aaron, the kids sitting near him would suddenly burst into tears, and I'd have to go and do damage control. But Aaron was quiet and calm, seemingly unfazed by it and its reaction to the nearby kids. I don't know if he could see it or feel it, but I knew I'd have to bide my time to help him. Back to school night was just around the corner, and I asked Aaron if his parents would be coming. When he said his mom would be meeting with me, I was eager to have her alone to discuss what was happening. But honestly, I wasn't sure how to broach the conversation. I just knew I had to try for Aaron. As Aaron's mom entered the classroom that night at her appointment time, she looked tired and distracted. We talked about the usual school-related things, and I knew I was running out of time. I asked her if she had noticed anything strange about Aaron lately, and she looked at me directly for the first time. He hasn't been the same since his father died last year. None of us have been, but in some ways it's been easier. He was a horrible, violent man and finally got what he deserved. I just wish poor Aaron hadn't found him. I came home to my poor boy standing at the top of the stairs, just staring at his dad, crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. He must have fallen. That must have been so hard for Aaron, but he never talks about it. I thought about Aaron and his mother as I gathered my bags and shut off my classroom light for the night. Looking down the hallway, I saw him. The dark shape was huddled at the foot of the stairs, seething. He locked eyes with me before I could look away. Now you know.